It's clear that Donald Trump and his administration are very, very suspicious of politicians like Mark Carney. Politicians, I would argue, like French President Emmanuel Macron. It's clear that he sees these leaders as being ideological adversaries, right? And that in fact, he feels more connection, obviously, to the extreme right wing parties in Europe, like the National Rally in France, like the AFD in Germany, like Reform, Nigel Farage's Reform in England, like Viktor Orban's Fidesz party in Hungary, Giorgia Meloni's Brothers of Italy. What are the implications of a U.S. administration having more fealty with their kind of ideological brothers and sisters than these states?
I think on a broader level, to go back to Carney's speech, I do think it behooves Western democracies around the world to realize that this kind of like autocratic nativist regime is not your friend. You can't rely on it. You have to diversify your interests. You have to build other alliance systems that can supplant your reliance on the US. I think Trump will be gone in a few years. There might be a Democrat, but then I think any subsequent Republican administration is likely to be sort of Trumpist in orientation for a long time. So I do actually think this is a moment for the Europeans, for Canada, but I also add Japan, South Korea, Mexico, the Latin American countries, to actually be thinking about a greater independence of the United States. Carney's basic point that there's been a rupture and that we can't go back to the old order is exactly right.
What is in the cards for Trump and administration, in Marco Rubio's words, the protection of Western civilization. We saw in his speech that he delivered at the Munich Security Conference, he said to the crowd, "We are part of one civilization, Western civilization. We are bound to one another by the deepest bonds that nations could share, forged by centuries of shared history, Christian faith, culture, heritage, language, ancestry, and the sacrifices of our forefathers made together for the common civilization to which we have fallen heir." Those are some pretty strong words.
They are absolutely strong words, but I'm not sure that they resonate outside of the right. It is a kind of very polarized view of the world. There was a CIA report in the early 50s under Dwight Eisenhower, a Republican, which said that we have to be careful to make sure that NATO is not seen as a white man's club. We don't want to be seen as the United States as, a defender of white civilization against the rest of the world. This is, again, a return to an older type view of politics, a pre-World War II type of politics, where the common bound between nations is not democratic legitimacy, but sort of like cultural. It is essentially a kind of like a racialized view of the world where, there's the white nations have to stick together.
Well, Rubio was actually lamenting the fact that anti-colonial uprisings had taken place. He seemed to be hankering for the good old days when colonialism was well entrenched.
Yeah, no, and again, I want to say that this is a long tradition on the right, that in the 1950s, even though Eisenhower and later Nixon would try to, appeal to formerly colonized people, there was elements on the right which lamented that, which criticized Eisenhower for siding with Egypt in the Suez Crisis as against England and France and Israel. And in some ways, to go back to the idea of a wounded animal, I see this as being a product of American setback and American defeat. The defeat in Iraq and Afghanistan, but also the diminishing power of the Western world in a world where the strongest areas of economic growth are China, the rest of Asia, India. This is an attempt to reconceptualize or revive this kind of like older style of imperialist thinking. But whether it can win a wide resonance, I honestly, in some ways, in a lot of ways, it contradicts Trump's own base of appeal, and one sees it among his own supporters. There's a lot of people on the American right itself who are saying well, we signed on to Trump because he's the anti-war president. He's not going to have the forever wars, and now he's on the verge of attacking Iran, right? You see people like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens saying that. So I'm not quite sure it's a coherent politics. Yeah, the ability of the United States to recreate imperial rule around the world, I think, is limited.